now to move to the second part of the forum, presentation by legislators with Senator Jason Lewis and Representative Nika Elgardo. Before I introduce them, I just want to highlight that I'm hosting this forum because of the absence of those mirrors and windows that affect my constituents. And I do believe that the legislation that's been filed, Senate 365, House 584, addresses that vacuum. This bill is really an example of a grassroots effort. It was proposed in response to the accounts and experience of students, teachers, community leaders, and organizations, both inside and outside my district, that people of color are underrepresented and underserved in curriculum, pedagogy, and educational practices in our public schools. My constituents and all Massachusetts residents have been affected by the events of 2020, including the murder of George Floyd and the ongoing challenges of 2021. This legislation, an act relative to anti-racism, equity, and justice in education, filed by Senator Jason Lewis and Representatives Nika Elgardo and Representative Erica Eiderhaven, is very important because education will provide for learning and recognize the history, culture, and contributions of all of our ethnic groups. And I think this bill represents a critical first step in perfecting our union and ensuring and really strengthening our democracy. And again, I know that there's a lot of legislation out there filed to tackle racism, to address racial injustice. And it's so important through this forum, but after the forum, make the education curriculum is really critical as well to get to the root of the problem. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues, Senator Jason Lewis and Representative Nika Elgardo, to discuss the nuts and bolts of this important legislation that they've introduced. So this is the first session the bill's been introduced. There will be Q&A from the audience at the very end, and so please put those in the chats. For Senator Lewis, he represents the people of the 5th Middlesex District of Massachusetts. First elected to the Senate, he has delivered results for his district and has been a true progressive leader for the Commonwealth. And hopefully, as most people know, he has long championed education equity and led the fight to pass the Student Opportunity Act in 2019, landmark legislation to ensure that every child in Massachusetts has access to a high quality public education. And Representative Nika Elgardo has over 25 years of experience in community and economic development with public, private, and nonprofit leaders, especially in BIPOC communities. And she represents the 15th Suffolk District, including the communities of Brookline, Jamaica Plain, Mission Hill, and Roslindale. And as a state rep, she continues her mission to expand the power and voice of people historically marginalized, from incarcerated activists to public housing residents to immigrant and BIPOC leaders. Thank you both, and looking forward to talking about your legislation.
Thank you so much, Senator Eldridge. It's just such a pleasure to be with you and Representative Elgardo and such an amazing group of advocates and activists, and particularly the inspiring students that are with us and that we heard from earlier this evening. Thank you, Senator Eldridge, for really bringing us all together. I feel so fortunate to serve in the Senate with you, and in many ways, you've been a role model and a mentor for me with the amazing social justice, economic justice, environmental justice, and racial justice work that you've long championed. I also want to give a particular shout out to my constituent and friend Maidu and the Greater Malden Asian American Community Coalition. And it really is not, it is not an overstatement to say that if it were not for Mai's passion and just kind of amazing coalition building skills and grassroots advocacy, we really wouldn't have this legislation that we're talking about tonight. So before I get into the details of the bill, let me just take a quick step back. And Senator Eldridge mentioned the Student Opportunity Act, but I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with that. But that was really landmark legislation that passed in late 2019. And it was the culmination of many years of work by so many people in the education community to ensure that we truly have equitable funding for our public schools. And with the passage of that legislation and with the implementation of that over the coming years, that's going to be a game changer for ensuring that our school districts that serve large numbers of disadvantaged students. These are particularly students that come from low-income families, students of color, students who don't speak English as their first language, have special needs, and so on. That the schools and the districts that largely serve these students will finally have the resources that they need to provide the high quality education that these students deserve. So that really, I believe, with this new funding formula, really will be leading the nation in this progressive approach to how to fund public schools. So that's going to be rolling out, in the coming years, and that's going to certainly be important in providing more resources for a variety of important initiatives that our schools need to undertake to support all students, particularly those who are the most disadvantaged. So I see this work in terms of anti-racism and racial justice in our schools as building on the Student Opportunity Act, again, that we passed a few years ago. So how this came about was, again, with the coalition building and the advocacy of MIDU and other advocacy groups. We kind of came together over a year ago and started looking at different examples and initiatives that could really, in a meaningful way, advance, anti-racism and ethnic studies in all of our public schools. So we looked at what other states, have been doing, certainly California, but a number of other states. We looked at efforts underway in some of our own school districts. We looked at what our state department, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has been doing, because there are some good initiatives that they've been pursuing in this area. And looked at also other legislation that we had passed in recent years that we thought could serve as a good model. For example, back in 2018, the legislature passed an important bill to support civics education in our schools. So I mention that all because that's sort of the context around and the research that we did to craft this bill. A lot of thought, went into it, even though it's a brand new bill that Senator Eldridge says is being filed for the first time. So the bill really has two main components to it. The first is that it will create a standing permanent commission, and that will be the Anti-Racism and Equity and Justice in Education Commission. As some of you may know, we have some other commissions like our Asian American Commission on the Status of Women. So we have some other examples, but this commission would be dedicated to pursuing and furthering these efforts in our schools. We've done some thought about, put some thinking into what the appropriate composition of the commission will be. And so we really wanted to reflect the different, racial and ethnic groups in the Commonwealth that would be centered in the makeup of this commission, as well as stakeholders who understand so well what needs to happen in our schools, like our teacher unions and our superintendents and so forth. What the commission will do is a number of very important things. First, they will be helping to develop curriculum materials, that will be focused on dismantling racism in our schools. So there is a lot of good work happening already here and around the country. There are some good materials that have been and are being developed, and the commission will bring those forward and into our support, bringing them into our schools. They'll also work to ensure that ethnic studies and racial justice permeates our curriculum and our culture in our public schools at all grade levels. Obviously, it needs to be age appropriate for different students at different grades, but making sure that is included across the board. They will, another important role that they will have is to advise and work with our Department of Education on efforts to diversify our educator workforce. That's a key part of this, of what we need to do. We have, over 40% of our students, our public school students, who are students of color in Massachusetts. And the percentage of educators of color is less than 10%. So there's a huge disparity there. And as I think was mentioned earlier, there's extensive research that shows that students of color who have just one teacher of color during their years in school leads to a whole range of positive outcomes. So that's going to be an important role for this commission. And then lastly, they will be working on efforts to support professional development and training for our educators and administrators in order to do this important work, as that is another need, as was mentioned by our students earlier. So that's the first part of the bill. Just quickly because I'm going to run out of time here and I want to leave enough time for Representative Alegardo. The second part is we will create a grant fund so that the commission, in partnership with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, is able to make grants directly to schools, to districts, to community-based organizations, and to higher educational institutions to do this important work, to develop the curriculum materials, to do the training, the professional development, and the work we need to do to diversify our educator workforce. So we think that's a powerful combination, and that's why both elements are included in this bill. I do want to give a shout out to a lot of great work that is happening already in a number of our school districts. And we think that this bill, by passing this bill, it will help to accelerate and expand those efforts and also to broaden them across, all of our school districts. In conclusion, the last thing I want to mention is also, I just want to make sure that on your radar is the Educator Diversity Act, which is essentially a companion piece of legislation that I have partnered with Latinos for Education and another coalition to file. And that bill would also implement a variety of strategies that would help diversify our educator workforce. So my hope this session is that we will pass this bill and also the Educator Diversity Act, and that would be tremendous for our pursuing our racial justice efforts in public education. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you this evening, and really excited to work together in the months ahead.